All right. Talking about intent clashes and selective confidence. So, going to go through this morning. I'm going to try and get through everything relatively quickly. Give enough time for questions at the end, everyone to dive in and just ask anything that we're doing. So, running through a little bit about who we are, where we've come from, and then a little bit of a use case, so a live customer of ours in market and how that's relevant to what we're actually doing around trying to solve for intent clashes and selective confidence. And then going through a little bit of our build process, so what it actually looks like, and our implementation of Rasa, which might be a little bit different for some people of how we've implemented it there, and touching on a few things and how we've used different training models. Also, how we have experience that we can either choose whether to use intents or whether we go completely intentless. And then also tightening the CDD loop, which is, all about getting our experiences in the hands of customers and users as quickly as possible through sort of rapid prototyping. So with that, we'll kick off. We're all sort of conversational designers, conversational AI and background, so context is key. So I thought I'd just give a little bit of background as to kind of where we've come from, and a little bit of an understanding about who we are. So we have been building conversational experiences since 2016, and we identified quite early on that from a true sort of conversational experience that ran between an organization and their customers, it had to be channel agnostic, had to be generic. We had to have a system that could run behind all channels, had to be an omni-channel solution. And it also had to be able to handle everything from sales through to support. We knew we never wanted to build an experience that was on one channel that was very specifically for sales or very specifically support. We were looking to solve true business problems. So it actually meant that we wanted a system that could be generic. And that meant not focusing on a specific business case or industry, which was probably a little bit risky. It's not your traditional mode for actually launching a company. You're told to sort of pick a vertical, pick a market and go hard after it. So we kept that a little bit different as we went to market. But I think in the early days, we definitely saw ourselves as the middleware pieces. We were connecting a lot of these pieces together. Essentially, we saw ourselves as conversational plumbing. We were basically pulling a lot of the pieces together and then just routing traffic. But what was interesting in the very beginning when we started building some of these solutions is we didn't actually see a product on the market that we saw that fit what we were trying to achieve with this vision across the space, where we could go and what we were trying to do. And then towards the end of 2016, the actual stars aligned for us, and Twitter approached us to build a bot for the US election behind their official @gov Twitter handle. And that was the first version of Iris that we actually launched. So it's a fairly steep learning curve into building conversational experiences. It was a huge amount of scale. They pushed that bot out to, it was around 33 million people as it went live, and it was rolling into the election day. So it was a very steep sort of learning curve, but that was the beginnings and sort of the genesis of Iris, which is our conversational AI platform. So the way we look at Iris is we're really building conversational AI for the future of the business. We're not trying to build for now. We're trying to build for where we think the puck is actually going rather than focusing on here and now. And it's all around sort of augmenting how businesses work, streamlining how they communicate with their customers. And also a sort of a key point for us is, and you'll see this come sort of touch on throughout the talk, is we're looking at this human in the loop concept. How do we put both the people that we're building it for and the people who are going to use it front and center in the product, in the experience? That drives the CDD process as well, and puts them front and center. It means that we get immediate sort of feedback. So from the perspective of Iris, we are focusing on conversational marketing, building virtual assistants, customer service, customer support, pre-qualification, and then also disruption notifications. So from a sort of a business use case when they're coming on board, they vary sort of market by market and industry by industry, but everything from notifying, engaging, empowering, and actually supporting customers as well. So we're a relatively small team, but we're based across Sydney, Melbourne, and London. We have some fantastic channel partners, which means we actually do support brands in different markets across the world, from EMEA, US, APAC through Australia, and New Zealand, and we get to work on some amazing projects, from everything from Twitter, Flight Center. We do launches of Epic Games. We've recently just worked with the US Democrats around the US election as well, non-profit space from Lifeline, and we're actually have a handful of transport operators as well that we've been rolling out with that have been able to utilize the software. And we see that the problem that we're solving in the market is very complementary to to Rasa. So you'll actually see how we've actually got Rasa running in there, and a little bit of a different take on it. So I guess, and one of the questions that does come up is, how are we working on conversational marketing? How are we running that at scale? And essentially what we found is that it's a conversational AI is a very powerful platform to be able to run conversational marketing, because we've already built for the scale and the personalization, which means it's really effective there. And that's kind of a space that we've been able to kind of corner and own globally. Onto this meat of it, intent clashes and selective confidence. So a couple of questions that are always sort of popping up when we're thinking about building an experience, especially a complex one, and you'll see the use case that I've got coming up, that when you have a lot of scenarios, you have huge amounts of data, what do you do when you hit intent clashes? How do you build an experience where you can avoid those scenarios and do it where more data is not going to solve your problems? I mean, more data will only get you so far. And one of the key problems in this use case with Flight Centre that I'm going to talk about is the refund problem. Where do you want a refund, and do we need to process your refund and pre-qualify you before we hand you over to an agent? Or do you just want information about it, and do you want a bit of background? And it's that contextually within an experience, how do we make sure we're asking you the right question? Then how do you do this with a certain level of accuracy and consistency? So when you're building at scale and you have thousands of people, how do you do it time and time again, really quickly and consistently across a conversational experience as well? And then from that perspective, if we have this in mind and we're thinking about CDD, we use this to actually drive our dialogue design. So we're thinking about how we can actually use a sort of selective confidence thresholds and only classify against certain intents at particular points in the actual conversational experience. We have always called it dialogue design since the very beginning. And that's sort of going back to 2016. We had to figure out what it was actually called. Fundamentally, it's exactly the same. Conversational driven development, dialogue design, absolutely same thing. It's essentially an approach, sort of a methodology and practice that we use. We have templates, we have processes, but essentially, I think it all comes down to it's customer-centric development and testing. How do you put people in the middle of what you're doing? How do you rapidly prototype, build out, get it in front of them, ingest data, and it's that human in the loop sort of conversational development. And we use that across sort of everything that we're doing. So for us, it is product development, but because we're both a product company and a service company, so we're building the solutions as well on top of our own product, as well as our customers using our product. That human in the loop is a product focus for us, and it's also a development and a customer experience process for us too. Flight Centre. So how do we actually build for customer experience? If you're not familiar with Flight Centre, because I don't think they operate in sort of every market globally, they're a travel company. So everything from booking flights, cars, and holidays. I think they're bigger in Europe, but an Australian founded company. So we look after the experience for them and have built on top of their platform. Really interesting use case. Month on month, they have thousands of customer interactions that are coming through the channels that we're supporting for them. Really interesting because it's almost sort of that marquee customer for us, because they have sort of customers segmented into sort of three sort of different types of customers. They have sales, they have support, and they have general inquiry. And customers reaching out they're either coming in with a general inquiry, they're pivoting into a support, pivoting into a sale, or they have a very distinct intent when they're coming through. Another interesting part about actually running on Flight Centre and being on a messenger channel is we get both organic and paid traffic. So some people coming through are just reaching out organically with Flight Centre with a support request. Other people are actually driven by Facebook ads. So that's where the system comes in to be able to do different entry points, detecting ad flows coming through and actually pushing people down a completely different path. And it was kind of key as a part of this experience as well, because they're such a big organization, to be able to actually integrate into their existing systems as well. And it's also quite complex, which is why I'm going to use this as a great example, because they're very complex business rules in place. They have about 5 different order numbers across the different types of different order numbers across the organization as well that people could have. There's 10 different scenarios through that. And then there's also complex business rules in place. So as we're building this solution and we're working on it, so the AI is running side by side with their agents, how do we take into consideration those business rules? And that's what we'll be diving into a little bit more. Cool. So kind of the how part of it, how do we actually go about this and dive a little bit deeper into this? And that human in the loop is key, and just diving a bit deeper on that one. From our perspective, it's the product is designed where people are in the loop from the very beginning. And it makes everything more efficient from us as well by having a product that is designed to have people in amongst the AI, designing and building it from a testing perspective as well, from a development, and then from a BAU. As we transition customers into business as usual, how do we make that training process that we take them through? How do we tighten that CDD loop as well, so that the feedback that's coming through, and it's kind of key for us as well. We're supporting customers globally, but at this point in time, there's only 12 people on our team. But we are rolling out new projects, anywhere between 2 or 3 new projects a week, working with different channel partners, customers globally. Efficiency is key for us. So it was almost out of necessity. We've had to figure out how to tighten that loop. And then also be able to build very flexible experiences. So we have an interesting implementation to Rasa where we can selectively design into it differing confidence thresholds based on where you are. We can selectively choose which intents to classify. And then within an experience, so when you dive into that experience with Flight Centre, there's not just a single Rasa model in there as well. We have 2 different Rasa models that are achieving 2 different things within the experience. And we can then choose different confidence thresholds at different points in time. And we do that. We can either do that programmatically, or we can actually do that by design as well. So this is a little bit more into the process about how we actually go about it. But I do actually have in the next couple of slides visually what this looks like as well. Touching a little bit on the actual Iris platform as well, because this is where, we have our Rasa service baked into there. And this is what it looks like when it actually runs. And this is also the process that we go through. So the dialogue designer allows copy editing and rapid prototyping. And that means that within that CDD sort of methodology and process, we're able to share what we're building very quickly and get it in the hands of customers. But it means that dialogue designer is also is a development tool for our guys internally as well, because it's a low programming language. And it also has all the integration interfaces as well. Then allows us to build out the conversational flow. And this is where we're actually encoding the business logic. So it is this sort of quite a complex piece in here, but allows us to go, share, review, and sort of annotate and test really quickly. To be able to roll out those experiences and selectively design in a visual sense what it actually looks like to adjust your confidence thresholds, or selectively go within this particular point in the experience, I only want to classify against these intents. Then Launchpad is the process of actually going design, staging, production, review, assess, repeat, go through that process. It is like a visual interface where you quite literally are testing and then pushing to production, and going through that process. then that sort of core conversation engine is where we've got Rasa. And the two different implementations of Rasa you'll see in the next slide is a traversal implementation, where this is us using intents and natural language classification to push people through an experience and move them through a conversation. And the second one is a knowledge-based lookup, so that we're able to hit a different model. And what we're able to do there is just serve back articles. That those articles that are served back can have people use sort of intentless actions to actually move to different parts of the experience. But we've got sort of two models sitting side by side at the same time. And then natural language interface as well allows us and also the customers to get in there and see the training data, and also be able to adjust the confidence threshold, see failed NLU, quickly retrain it, discard it, simulate it, load test it, and then constantly just go through that cycle quite quickly. So it's just that all of these sort of everything from the designer to the launch pad to the conversation engine and the natural language interface come together to just tighten that CDD loop. But then also allow us sort of the very sort of fine-grained, granular ability to adjust certain things. And this is where we really get into the meat of this sort of selective confidence threshold, selective intent. So as I said before, we've got these two within experience. Generally, we have two Rasa models running, and we have this one for traversal that moves the user through the conversational experience, and another one for natural language search. And because we're going through this and it's a visual programming language and it is low programming, so it is executed in real time, the logic that's actually run by our system. But because it's visual, it's a conversation flow. So if you're thinking when you're building conversational experiences, you need a decision tree, right? So we're literally doing the decision tree in here. Then we're coming back around and we're applying copy to it. Then we're connecting the natural language experience to it. Then we're actually testing it and running it and iterating on it. And everything is done here from a design perspective. And the key here, and you can see that purple arrow that I have there, that's the ability to selectively link and unlink intents that we don't want to classify at specific points in the actual experience as well. So we can actually decide that contextually you're halfway through a support flow or you're answering questions around FAQ and support. We don't want to classify against all of the sales intents there. So what we can actually do there is that's where we programmatically, quite literally, link and unlink those nodes in the dialogue. And that means that even though the Rasa model is training against it programmatically there, we can adjust our confidence threshold in that call to Rasa when it returns and choose which intents we actually classify back. So if a node is only connected to support requests there because we want to move someone around from a support perspective, we can have an individual, like a sales change of mind intent that sits there. And that may be the only sales intent that we train against that. And that can be along the lines of, returning to the user, hey, you're halfway through, solving a support request. Are you sure you want to push over to the sales team? Things like that. So it gives us a lot of flexibility. What we can also do is we can change the priority in which we're classifying as well, so that the NLU knowledge base calls versus the NLU traversal, we can choose at different times to classify one higher than the other based on whether we think you're at the top of the experience where you might be asking a more general question, or if you're further down the experience, we actually think you understand how it works. You're asking sort of fine-grained questions. You're in a sales flow. Maybe at that point, we don't even want to be classifying against the natural language knowledge base. So, and then at each point when we do that, we have this ability contextually to understand where you are and what we think you're doing within that experience and adjust the confidence threshold as well. And we can do that with such fine-grained sort of ability because it's contextual NLU and we know we're not trying to classify against all of the intents. We're being very selective about how we actually do this. Just having a quick look at the time, see how we're going. Cool. So kind of wrapping that up and sort of in conclusion a little bit. So that's kind of a really high level and more than happy to take any questions about how we do this. But that's kind of as a high level how we select different intents based on context. And, context is kind of key to designing conversations And we use that context to reduce the clashes, knowing that, only so much data is actually going to help us. And then how do we actually leverage that context to adjust confidence thresholds? And all of this kind of comes together with that sort of human in the loop process to tighten that CDD workflow. And I guess what we're doing there is, and our implementation of Rasa as well, enables this sort of flexibility and versatility that we weren't able to achieve just by using Rasa by itself. So we've put this layer over the top of it, which gives us this fine grain where we can encode sort of brand voice, business logic, and kind of a ability to start to be very selective about the type of experience that we give a user at a particular point. So that's how we design and build experiences.